Microsoft celebrates 9 years of the ID at Xbox program. Tango Gameworks wants to make many different styles of games, and Raven Software employees ask Microsoft what they would do if their union gets recognized. So Xbox is celebrating 9 years since the launch of the ID at Xbox program, and I would say it's been a pretty successful program, especially with Xbox Game Pass, as we have gotten some just really awesome indie games coming to the service either on day one or after they've already been released. We recently just had that ID at Xbox showcase, I believe back on March 16th, where they had shown off a bunch of cool games, and they had launched Tunic into Xbox Game Pass on day one, WrestleQuest, which looked very cool, plus lots of other ID at Xbox games that will be coming out. So there's lots of things to look out for when it comes to indie games coming to Xbox, and over these 9 years, Xbox has accomplished a lot, and they talk about it here in this Xbox Wire post. So firstly, they talk about some of the innovations that have come to Xbox, and some of them have come directly because of these indie developers stating what they wanted and what they needed in order to deliver their games. And they mention here innovations like crossplay across other consoles, for example, came directly from ID at Xbox partners. I mean, that's awesome because crossplay is one of, I say, the best features that consoles have gotten over the last couple of generations. Started with like the PS4 and the Xbox One era. And that was something I think since the inception of online gaming on consoles, people probably wanted, because there is no real thing to hold back people from Xbox playing with PlayStation. It really is just up to these companies to flip that switch and get them playing together. At least that's from what I understand. And if you remember a little while ago, there were those court documents that came out where it talked about how PlayStation was holding back turning on crossplay for a while because of the deals they had in place and the money that they wanted to make. So that alone proved that this was something that the companies just had to agree on, and then you could start playing crossplay with people across different platforms, and we have that now, which is awesome. They also say here that this all started stemming from their feedback and requests. They had made lots of changes to the back-end publishing systems and even the app framework. So continuously growing and improving how these features work for these publishers and developers is something they've taken from this feedback. They say here as well, since the program's inception, independent developers have earned more than $2.5 billion in royalties, and total revenue generated by ID at Xbox partners on Xbox almost doubled over the last 3 years, which is a great thing to see because it just means that more of these great indie games that we love are going to be able to be developed, and they're going to probably be able to make sequels to some of the games that they have put out. And a lot of this also probably has to do with Game Pass itself. Having these games being discovered on Game Pass, having them being discovered in the Xbox store helps push them forward. And they even mentioned here that they've paid developers and publishers across Xbox hundreds of millions of dollars in Game Pass license fees. Now, there's a big number of developers and publishers that are trying to put out games with the ID at Xbox program. More than 4,600 developers from 94 countries worldwide, they say, are looking to deliver experiences to players via Xbox, including more than 1,000 creators who signed up for the ID at Xbox program over the last 2 years. And we know that this is going to get even easier going forward, as they mentioned that they are launching the ID at Azure program, which will allow indie developers to create games via the cloud, which will reduce their overall cost to have to make these games and just give them access to some features and some development tools that they may have not have had access to unless they signed up for that program, which I think is a great thing. It'll just enable more people being able to make games, and hopefully we get more just good ideas and more creativity out of that. Now, it pushes all of this home for indie developers for the ID at Xbox, and why this program I think is successful is because of the amount of games that have been discovered and played from indie developers. A lot of this has to do, I think, with Xbox Game Pass. A lot of it has to do with Xbox trying to make these games more discoverable on the Xbox store, which, I mean, just like with anything, even like with my YouTube channel, if YouTube doesn't make my channel discoverable, nobody's going to find it. Nobody's going to be able to watch these videos. If Xbox doesn't make these games easy to find or promote them, no one's going to find the games. Nobody is going to play them. But they say here, if you've joined Game Pass, the average member plays 30% more genres and plays 40% more games, with the majority of those games being outside of Game Pass. So not only are they playing the games within Game Pass, they're discovering other games that, hey, they can just buy off of the Xbox store and play them that they wouldn't have discovered unless they actually got into the ecosystem. And that's another thing I think that isn't really thought about too much when it comes to Xbox Game Pass and people who sign up for it. Yeah, it's great the amount of games in there, and it's great the amount of different genres and things that you can try out once you're in the service. But once you're in the ecosystem, you're most likely going to venture out to the Xbox store and see what else is available and just discover stuff that may not be within Xbox Game Pass, which would naturally increase the revenue for some of these games that, hey, they probably wouldn't have been discovered if it wasn't for somebody entering into the ecosystem via Xbox Game Pass. All right, jumping over here to Tango Gameworks. So today is the release of Ghostwire Tokyo, but as we know, this is a game that is a console exclusive to the PlayStation 5 and also coming out on PC. It's a Xbox Game Studios first party game, but it isn't going to be available on Xbox until next year. But Tango Gameworks has been known for, I would say, mainly their horror style of games, the Evil Within series, which is a pretty highly acclaimed horror survival series, horror survival games. And they have talked about Ghostwire Tokyo and they've talked about those games, but now they are looking to start a new project. So Shinji Mikami, the founder of Tango Gameworks, had an interview with Famitsu, and he talked about people thinking that they are mainly a survival horror studio who makes games in that genre. And here's what he says. Of course, it's nice to have fans think of us as a studio with a reputation for developing survival horror games, but we also want to be viewed as a studio that can create a wider variety of games. And on top of that, he mentions here that John Johannes is the director of The Evil Within 2, and he is now actually working on a brand new game outside of the horror genre, saying it's really a good game, so keep your eyes peeled. Mikami also talks about how the studio is going to be moving away from just working on big AAA games and how sometimes it's kind of hard to always work on games in these huge teams and want to move to a more smaller, agile team, saying, first of all, we should produce a masterpiece every 10 years. So, I mean, that's awesome. Every 10 years, masterpiece, you think about that, that's like a 10 out of 10, a perfect game, or at least in the eyes of a lot of people. Secondly, we want young people to create new games on their own. We also want to nurture good game creators. I mean, that's great to hear too. And you think about his sentiment there, you think about what Xbox is doing with something like the ID at Azure program, where that's where you're going to get a lot of younger people creating their own things because they have the ability to do that with the tools through the cloud. Maybe Tango Gameworks will also be able to utilize things like that. Continues on here to say, in recent years, commercial considerations have meant that we have had to develop in large teams. However, thanks to the emergence of game subscription services over the past few years, we feel that it is now possible to make games on a smaller scale. So, I mean, he's right there saying, because of the effect of something like Xbox Game Pass, is giving them the ability to kind of branch out and not just have to focus on that one big AAA game. Now, for me personally, I definitely want them to still be trying to strive for that big AAA game. Maybe that's that masterpiece every 10 years. But if they can kind of put smaller games in between releasing that big AAA one, I'm all for that as well. So some great insight there from Mikami, and I'm excited to see what comes next from Tango Gameworks. And I mean, Ghostwire Tokyo is out today on the PS5. If you have a PS5, you want to try it out there. If not, it's going to be over on Xbox Game Pass in a year. So we have some more information here about the Microsoft Activision deal, and it has to do with unionization. So there was a letter sent exclusively to Axios, and Stephen Totilo reported on this, and here is his explanation on Twitter. And here's what he says. 15 workers at Raven Software have sent a letter to Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella to clarify the company's position on their potential union, and they're asking Microsoft to use any leverage to stop what they call Activision's union busting efforts. In a statement to Axios, Microsoft says it won't stand in the way of Activision recognizing the union, but plenty of questions remain, including what conditions Microsoft might put on any collective bargaining agreement if/when they have a seat at the table. Now, this letter that they had sent to Microsoft is actually going to be running in a Seattle newspaper, the Seattle Times, on Sunday, and you can see it here. This is what I believe is going to be running, and they talk about what's going on and the union, and if they're going to recognize it, and what's Microsoft going to do for them. So very interesting, and I'm not sure what this means for the deal, how this affects it in any way, but Hoeg Law actually weighs in here on Twitter saying they don't need to stand in the way. The merger agreement already does that for them. 5.2, and the company will not voluntarily recognize any labor union, work council, or similar employee organization or enter into a collective bargaining agreement. Meaning, I guess, even though they say they're not going to stand in the way, it doesn't really matter what they say because of what's right now written in the agreement. Continues on here to say, worth noting that Microsoft can separately consent to such action as they always could, given that the parties can always amend an agreement. So this may be a signal as to that, but the baseline as negotiated by Microsoft was to ask that Activision not. So I don't know what this really fully means going forward, how this affects anything, if it affects anything. But if Microsoft does not want to stand in the way, from what we understand from what's being said here, is that they're going to actually have to go ahead and amend the deal with Activision Blizzard, which, if that happens, will probably slow up the process. But they are expecting this deal to go through by June 2023. I guess at the latest, and that still gives a lot of time if they have to do something like that. That's it for me, guys. What are your thoughts on all of this stuff, the ID at Xbox statistics, and just the 9 years of the program, Tango Gameworks and the direction they want the studio to go in, and the union with the Raven software employees? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up button. Make sure to subscribe if you're new and you enjoyed what you saw. Thank you guys all for watching. Thank you for your support, and I'll catch you in the next video.